look at how the UI operates in Graphite, and we'll go over some screens.
Great. I think participants
Okay.
are excited to know about it. Let's start.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to share the PowerPoint, and then after that we'll share. Sorry, I'm going to share my virtual machine first. We'll look at one web page rendering on the browser, and then we'll go back to the PowerPoint, look at it, and then we'll discuss more in detail.
Sure.
So yeah, let me actually start off with the PowerPoint so we can just review what we're going to look at today. Okay, we're just going to simply look at how the UI framework works in Graphite, and then we look at this concept of page instructions, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I'm going to switch over I want to share my virtual machine now. Vijay, let me know if you guys can see my screen or if you don't, okay?
We can see your desktop as well.
Excellent. So now here we're in Graphite. If you saw the first webinar, there's this application that we built, a very small application with just one web page. So in this category, I see the view. A view is what becomes a web page. So this web page was very, very simple. In the header, I put a toolbar panel, obviously by pushing plus, I chose toolbar panel. It added it here. The only thing I did here is put interest. So I saw the preview here, and that's the toolbar panel. It's up top. I just only set the title. And then in the content area, I put a form. Inside the form, I put 2 field sets. And inside the first field set, I put 2 fields, principal and rate. And that's what you see here. Obviously, I set the titles. So I set the name of the field to be principal field, but the label to be principal, and that's why I see principal there. So in the second field set, I put a duration field. And then I put a button, and then I put the heading. So you see that stuff here. So that's pretty much it. So then we went and set everything else up, the behaviors and all that. But today we're going to look at how this renders in the browser. So when I went and did a build, so it built the whole thing, and it deployed the application in inetpub, right? Which is where IIS keeps all its websites. So basically, just to review, when we did the build, it created the C# code. So let's quickly take a look at where it does that. So it creates the C# code in local app data, Graphite GTC, build, incubate hub, calculator, which is name of the project. This is the build folder. There's your C#. So it creates 2 C# projects. One is the web, and you see the CSP ROJ file, and the other is all the business logic. So why do you have 2 C# projects? We talked about that in the first webinar. It's multi-tier web application, obviously very highly secure. So you have all the front-end stuff. So you have the web pages and the JavaScript in this project, in the web project, and the controllers also. So the request from the back end comes to this controller, and then the controller basically calls into the back end to do whatever business logic. For example, calculate simple interest. It's here. So the reason for that, obviously, everybody on the call knows why it's a good practice to do this. It's for security. I'll just repeat it anyway. This can be deployed in front of the firewall, and this can be deployed behind the firewall, and so it's highly secure. Now, modern day scripting web applications, when you use things like PHP, Python, or Node.js, Now you have to take care of a lot of the security stuff inside your code. It's very vulnerable for hacking. Whereas when you build applications with languages like Java or C#, create a backend that goes behind the firewall, create a front end that just purely does UI, does not do any business logic, you get well-architected applications that are highly maintainable and last long and are obviously highly secure. So how does, and then of course it compiles this code using MS Build, and then it deploys to IIS. So it deploys it here. As you can see, my machine has a lot of websites, but we called our, if you go back into environments and edit the environment, we called our website local.incubate-calc.com. So if you go into IIS, the IIS manager, if you see local.incubate-calculate.com, that's where the website has been deployed. This, obviously, if you look at bindings, you'll know what path that is. I'm sorry, I think it's the basic settings, my fault. You see that it's deployed to C, inetpub, local, incubate-calc.com. So now we go back to Windows Explorer. If you go to C, inetpub, incubate, bear with me. This is where the whole website is deployed. And here you'll see our page. So when we go and surf to that page, when we go to that particular website, the first page, because when we created the page here, when we created the page, so when I click on the page name, it shows the page properties. I made it the default view. So what happens is this is the first page. When we go to that website, the first page that gets invoked is the interest page.html. When we go to that page, as you can see, it's exactly the same as when you designed the view. Now we're going to look at how this page got rendered. So first, let's look at what's inside the HTML itself. You look at this HTML, it's blank. If you look at body, there's some script tags and nothing else in the body. So if you invoke this HTML page, you should have only seen a blank page, but we actually don't see a blank page. We have an actual page that has fields and toolbars and buttons and stuff. Today we're going to look at how Graphite renders this page, even though the HTML it generates is blank. And it's, if you guys on the call know what dynamic page building is, it basically uses that concept. So I'm going to stop sharing and go into the PowerPoint to kind of show you how Graphite does that. So there are two parts to a page. We're going to first look at how the page is rendered when you surf to it. And then when you push a button, how does Graphite update that page? So we're going to look at that as step 2. But let's look at step 1 first. So here you're sitting in front of the browser, and basically you're saying, okay, get me interest.html. So the request goes back to the web server, and the web server sends you the blank page. So you request the blank HTML interest page.html. It returns the blank page. And if you looked at that, and we'll look at that blank HTML in a second here, at the bottom there was some JavaScript. What that JavaScript does is it makes an AJAX call to your onload view behavior. And then what the onload view behavior does is it returns a JSON called view. And then once the browser returns the JSON view, in step 5, which I obviously missed here, let me put that. it uses the view JSON to render the page. My apologies. So it uses the view JSON to render the page. So let's go back to my virtual machine again. So when we go to this page, it makes a call back to the server, gets this empty page, and then it calls this JavaScript method called page.setup, which then comes back to the server to this flowchart. And you can do whatever with this flowchart because one of the variables available here is view. And view is basically everything you see here. So, and also, let's say, well, let's do a modification here and you'll see what happens. So we have this toolbar here, right? And let's say instead of interest, we want to set the toolbar title to calculator, but we want to do it in the onload view. All we have to do here is do our sign shape. We can directly access the toolbar panel and get any of its properties and then type the title here. Now you can put the string directly here, but a better way to do that in Graphite is to do translation keys, colon, and type the translation so that way you can support multi-language. So I'm setting the title to calculator. I click add, I click OK, and then I connect this. So what we're doing is when we designed the page, we were setting the properties here, but also in onload view, we, for some reason, let's say, we put some code here and we decided the title should be calculator. Now when I build, you will see how the page will render. So same thing, we call interest page.html, which brings the blank page, which then goes back to call the onload view. Onload view, we modify the page manually through code, if you will, through flowchart. And then it returns it. See, it's the output. The whole view is returned. So now the toolbar's title is set to calculator. And the JSON format of the view comes back to the client. And then the client basically renders it, and there's your calculator title. So that's how a page is rendered. So whenever you're creating a web page in Graphite, you can now go to onload view. Before the page is rendered, you can modify it. You can go to the database, concatenate a person's name, for instance, and put it on the screen and things like that. So you can do this before the page is rendered. Next, we're going to look at what happens when you push calculate. So when you push calculate, it has to take the principal rate, duration, and send it back to the server. And then it should come back with some result and update the page. When you do that, there are two options in regular web programming. You can replace the whole page or only selectively update certain parts of the page. If you want to selectively update certain parts of the page, in Graphite you have things called page instructions. That's what you would use to update it. So let's review that. When you look at the button here, so if I push Control key on my keyboard and I push the button, it takes us to that widget here and it shows all its properties. There are two properties here that you want to look at. Form to submit. There we chose the interest form, which means when I click this button, go to the form, take all its fields, find what the user entered in the value, and pass it to this flowchart. So when you go to this flowchart, you will see that those three fields are automatically set up as inputs. And one very important thing is automatically Graphite creates a list of page instruction and names a variable called page instructions. Whenever you create a page instructions to update the page, it goes into this list. And this list is sent back to the browser, and the browser goes one by one each page instructions, and it executes each page instruction. Let's look at our flow chart here. So this is the on click of the calculate button. So when you click the calculate button, there's an AJAX call request made to the server, which ends up here. And of course, by setting a breakpoint, we can test all of that stuff, which we will do in a few minutes once we review this. And we look at each variable. So the first thing it does is it initializes this list. It initializes this list, and then it calls the calculate simple interest to calculate the interest. Then it updates the page using a page instruction. So how did I set this up? So I've calculated the simple interest here. It came back to outputs, right? It came back with this variable as outputs. So that variable dot outputs dot new interest will return an object called new interest, and dot amount will get me the amount. How do I now update this heading widget that I put on the page with the interest amount that came back from this? All I do is use the page instruction. I double click on the page instruction. There are several different page instructions. I'm gonna go over a document that lists all of this, these page instructions. I want to update a value of the widget on the screen. And it's on the current page, but if I'm in a modal, I can update the parent, so I can use parent and choose which parent it is. Here I want to update the element. I want to update the value. And I want to update the heading. How do I know it's heading? I'll show you in a second. Because I set up that heading widget and set it to 0.00. So there you go. I'm taking amount and I'm updating the value of interest heading on the page. When I do this, Graphite creates the instruction and automatically puts it in this list. So you don't have to worry about putting it in the list. So I connect it to the save that I have there. So I put that thing back there. So let's save this here because it's not saved. So now let's go back and build. And obviously, when I refresh the page, so now it's calling onload view, got the JSON, it rendered the page. I put 50,000 here, 6.5, 9 years. When I push calculate, it's calling this behavior and it's returning that page instruction, which then processes it and updates this interest setting. So let's push calculate. And it's loading up all the DLLs the first time. And there you go, it created the result. So you can try that again. You see it was fast. So let's look at this whole thing in debug mode. And then I'm gonna talk to you about all the different page instructions, and then I'll open it up for questions. So let's go and set 2 breakpoints here. First, we'll set a breakpoint in onload view. Then we'll set a breakpoint in on-click calculate button and see when they get called. And we'll look at variables also. Now I'm going to go back to settings. I'm going to go to debug. As you can see, there are 3 breakpoints here. Even calculate simple interest as a breakpoint, so I'm going to remove it for this lesson, so we don't need to stop there. I'm going to start a debug session. Click OK. And now I'm going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to recycle this page. In fact, let's get out of the browser completely and resurf to the page. I can go here and I can click on this link, but if the build screen is not open, I can always go back to the environment screen, and you'll see the URL link there. I can click on it. Notice interestpage.html, we serve to it, and it's blank. In fact, if you right-click and inspect, you will notice that there is just the pinwheel. No other HTML has been rendered. This is just the pinwheel that's rotating here. So you can see there's nothing in the body. But the page.setup has been called, which is a JavaScript method, which in turn calls the onload view. When you, and see if the breakpoint is set up at start. When you click on the eyeglasses, you'll see two variables here. Now, when you have a login page and you let the user log in and you set this variable, that's a system variable, current user. And if you set that variable with the user record or user entity, Graphite will take care of sending that back and forth. We'll look at that whole current user in another webinar. All Graphite applications are stateless. Again, the reason why it's stateless is because a well-designed web application should be stateless for several reasons, performance and security. So we'll talk about that in another webinar. But in this webinar, we're going to talk about this variable, the view. It's empty right now, but that's why the first shape will instantiate it. It'll instantiate it with an object structure called interest page. As you can see, that's the name of the view. So I'm going to step over that. And now we're going to take a look at that view object. The view object is nothing but an object structure of the page you defined. So you can see view as a header, header as a toolbar panel. My apologies. Header as toolbar panel. The view as a content as a form as two field sets. The first field set as fields, and as the principal field and the rate field. Let's quickly go over to the page and see if all these things that we just looked at exist on the page. There's your page. You have the header, which has toolbar panel. You have the content. Oops, sorry. I can click on this. My fault. Content as interest form, which has two field sets. The first field set has field set one fields, which has two fields. Sorry. So when we go back to that breakpoint and look at that variable again, you'll notice you get everything in the page showing up in this view variable. And you can basically say view.header.toolbar panel.title and set it to whatever we want. It's currently interest, which we set in the properties when we're designing the screen. But here, we updated it with the word calculator. Now again, notice how I did not have to use view.header.toolbarpanel.title. One of the easy things we have provided in Graphite is you can directly access the widget that you put on the screen. So there are two ways to do it. You could have done view.header.toolbarpanel.title, or if you want to use calculator, it should be already there, but it's not showing. Anyway, so you can do that, or you can directly access any widget that you have put on the screen. I'm not going to save that. So you can directly access any of these widgets that you have put on the screen. If you have dragged and dropped it, that means it will be available in the onload view. So that's what we did. We took the toolbar panel, set the title, and that's it. So when I push continue, now it came back the JavaScript, and you can always use this debug, go to sources, and if you're used to debugging through Google the development tool, you can debug all the JavaScript. When you build in debug mode, all of this will be available. You can debug it. So that's the thing about Graphite. As a developer, you don't have to worry about this whole mechanism I have just talked to you about. I talked to you about all this complicated, it comes back empty, it goes back to the server, it returns the JSON, it renders the JSON on the web page. When you click a button, it goes back to the server, it returns the page instruction JSON, it renders it. All of that complexity is abstracted from you guys. It is, when you're using Graphite, it is as easy as coming here, drawing your page. On the onload view, you go in, do whatever you want before the page is rendered so the page shows up properly. And when you click the button, you put the flow chart and you put these page instructions to update the page. All of the complexity on how this is rendered, is what happens, all of that is taken away. So what you get is, number one, in super fast speed, you can build pages. But the more important thing is the technology it renders behind the scene. You don't even have to see a single line of code, but it is guaranteed that you're absolutely building the most secure and most well-designed application literally on the planet. So that's something that you can be confident that you're building a near perfect application. So anyway, so the page now has rendered because we just went past the onload view. And once it finishes this last shape, it returns the view. The view comes back here. Remember, this was black and blank. It then goes through that view JSON and builds each one of those widgets using JavaScript. So JavaScript renders the page. The page is not created on the server side. Again, distributed work. The client, the browser is doing the work of building the page, and the server is not doing that. Again, increased performance. I'm going to talk about Angular and React in a second, okay? So now we're going to type some values. And I'm going to push calculate. When I push calculate, notice how, anyway, since I pushed save, it's complaining that the project was changed. I'm just going to simply click OK. When I push calculate, again, breakpoint in the on-click calculate button. Let's look at the variables here. If you had the current user set up, it will Graphite will handle everything. It'll track the user and it'll send it back to you so you know who the user is. So every flow chart will get the current user. Once again, we'll talk about it in the next webinar. And there are your fields that got submitted. Because the calculate button, we said that it should submit that form when it's pushed. So you got the field sent to us, not the whole field and its properties. Notice that it's only sending you the value. So again, why is that? We don't put a whole bunch of stuff on the wire. We simply put just the values of the fields on the wire to go back to the server. Again, performance. Every single thing about Graphite is about security, quality, and performance. Three things take you throughout the project. And you don't have to worry about it. Graphite takes care of it. That's the beauty of the system. So the field values come in, and you notice the output variable page instructions is empty. Again, output variable page instructions is a list, and it's empty. But the first shape that's automatically clicked in we call this view controller behavior, is automatically created. So the page instruction is initialized. So when I step over, the page instruction is initialized with no items in it. So it's a list with no items. So here we are calling this flow chart. It's taking the three variables as input and returning that new interest object. We didn't set a breakpoint there, so we're not going to go there. We're going to step over. But you see that the output, the result, is interest calculated, simple interest result. So if you go in, you see that that variable has outputs, and it has an output called new interest, and there is your amount, 2655. Now, if you think this variable is too long, you can change it to be small. So you can just make it X if you wanted, and then you can say X dot in outputs dot new interest amount. It's your choice. One of the things that we do at Graphite is make sure things are as descriptive as possible. So now we got the output in new interest, and we got amount. We got to take this amount and put it on the page. Now, in future versions of Graphite, you will be able to say new interest heading dot amount equals this the new interest dot amount, and it should take care of it. Right now, we have this concept called page instructions. In this page instructions, I'm saying take the interest heading and update its value with amount. And the reason why we wanted to do this was we wanted to give the senior developers the control to have a list of page instructions, and the whole team kind of stay within that guardrails of those instructions. So we set up like a 200 some instructions, and then people stay in that instruction, so you know everything is secure. So anyway, so here what happens is when I step over this, it will create an instruction, and it will add it to the list of page instructions. So when I step over, you will notice now page instruction does not have no items. It actually has one item. And if you look at the page instruction object, it says update the element name is interest heading, and the value is 26550. So that, and then we're saving it, which we will look at in another webinar. But basically now it's returning this to the client, to the browser, a list of these page instructions, and you could have had multiple page instructions, which we will see in a second. We'll add another instruction, and we'll see what happens. And if I simply push continue, Graphite sends that whole page instruction, list of page instructions. Again, JavaScript, you can simply figure out where it's coming back, and you can see that that 2655 is updated in the interest heading. Let's go in and add another page instruction here. Let's say we wanted to do the notification instruction. We'll say slide right. We'll do the calc. We'll say, and we'll say and we'll put a duration of 3 seconds. Let's go ahead and do a build. Let's go back and refresh the page. Once again, when you refresh the page, before the page is being drawn, it comes to onload view, where onload view, each shape is processed. And when we push continue, it sends the view JSON and draws the whole thing here. Now we're going to put 5,000. Of course, there is some mistake in the calculation, but we'll worry about that later. I enter the 3 values. I push calculate. On-click calculate button is called. And here, as you can see, page instructions is empty, which is null. Then when I step over, page instruction has no items. We then calculate another, we call another flow chart, which is calculate simple interest. We do the first page instruction. So when I step over that, you see that the page instruction has 1 instruction in it. When I step over the next thing, which is send a notification to the screen, when I step over that, you notice how there's the second instruction in this page, and that's a show notification instruction. And I step over this and continue. You'll notice there is that instruction. And notice interest has been calculated. It doesn't look like a proper English sentence because we put a keyword in here. And I went through this in the first webinar. We go in here to the home page. We go to add, edit languages. Here are the true translation keys. Languages, English, US. Created the translated keys. I'm going to do another build. This time before we execute, I'm going to go switch off the breakpoints. You can switch off breakpoints here or go to settings and remove them there as well. So now I'm going to go refresh the page. So when you build the first time, it'll be slow. So as you can see, it's empty. It went back to the server, brought the Vue.json, rendered the page. Now I'm putting in. Now when I'll put 9 just to stay. When I push calculate, it's calling the on-click calculate button, getting the page instructions, and it's rendering the two things here, 2 page instructions. One, it updated this, and then it showed that notification. So that is how page instructions work. Now, the next question will be, okay, Chris, you use 2 page instructions. How many such page instructions do you have? For Graphite, there's the Knowledge Center. I reviewed what Knowledge Center is. Knowledge Center gives you a lot of resources to help build Graphite-based web applications. You go to References section, and here you have a document called Graphite Studio Page Instructions. If you open this document, and you can download it and save it as a PDF if you want it, here is a list of all the page instructions that you can do. So for example, we updated a heading. So if you look at heading, or you can simply search, how do I update a heading? How do I update the title of a heading? And it actually shows you the page instruction shape. It says choose type value, current, action is update element, instruction is title, target element, the instance of the view element that you want to update. This is optional. And then here's the title that you want to type. Or it can be a variable, whatever you want. So if you go back, you will see that it's exactly the same as what you saw in that document. So using this page instructions document, you can pretty much update the screen very, very easily from a flow chart using these page instructions. So again, you don't have to write a single line of code. With these shapes, you can get a lot of work done. What we are finding is if it takes 30 days to build an application with handwritten code, with Graphite, you can build that same application in about 15 days, about half the time. When you're learning, of course, you have to learn the product. It may take longer, but once you become good with Graphite, we're finding that it takes 15 days to build that same application. But the output quality, the quality of the application, and of course, I'm not talking about the look and feel. That can be modified using Graphite theming, but the whole structure of MVC, NTR pattern, highly secure, all of that stuff is taken care of for you. You just have to concentrate on what the application should do. So what happens is programmers end up building real quality applications because they're not spending time thinking about things like cross-origin requests and SQL injection and, you know, all of those things that you have to worry about when you're building regular web applications. With that, I guess I can open it up for questions. Vijayta, go ahead and
yes.
open up the team for questions.
Yeah. So, team, you can unmute yourself and you can ask any questions if you have. Meanwhile, please, I remember one of the participants was asking.
Vijayta, we can't hear you. Vijayta, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Am I
Yes.
audible now? Okay.
A little bit better.
This, one of the participants was asking that the person was having it difficult to download the Graphite platform.
I'm sorry, Vijayta, I'm sorry. Just type in the chat window, please, because we really can't hear you. Thank you.
Meanwhile, team, if you're having any questions, please ask.
Vijayta, like I said, we can't hear you. I'm assuming you're typing the chat so everybody can see the question.
Yes. There's some difficulty. Great. My system is kind of hanged. So I'm finding it difficult to load my chat. So,
Christopher, can you hear me?
Yes, Geetanjali, we can hear you.
Actually, I had a problem in downloading the Graphite Studio in my laptop.
Okay.
It was a Windows 7, so will it not support Windows 7? Would I have to take Windows 10?
It should be okay with Windows 7. What was the problem? But yes, recommended operating system is either Windows 10 or Windows Server.
Okay, when I installed the Graphite Studio application in my laptop, it was asking for Microsoft.setup update. And I had downloaded the same version of that setup, but it was telling that update is not applicable on this computer. So it was not working on my system.
Okay, so that is, you're talking about the Microsoft Setup EXE didn't run on your machine?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I will have to have my team do some research about whether Graphite can run on Windows 7. So, Geetanjali, take my email address in the chat window. I'm typing it, and email me so I can respond back to you with a reply on whether we can get it running on Windows 7. But remember, it's probably best you develop on Windows 10 because that's what Graphite is recommended for, Windows 10 and Windows Server.
Sure, I will do that.
Okay. Now,
thank you.
As a good practice, and I see this quite a bit in the software development world, as a good practice in a good software engineering shop, you should always develop on the machine you're going to deploy to. What I mean by that is, if your production server is Windows Server, then it's best to develop on a Windows Server virtual machine on your laptop. But most people usually will have a production machine which runs Windows Server, but develop on Windows 10. And that's what leads to problems like, it works on my machine, but it doesn't work in production. Those problems will be alleviated by doing that. When we work on actual Graphite projects for some of the largest clients in the US, we follow that methodology. But Graphite still works on Windows 10, and I can look into seeing whether it can work on Windows 7 as well.
Sure, thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? Feel free to type your question in the chat window.
Participants can unmute yourself and you can speak to the speaker. I think no questions, Chris.
Yeah, I feel like there are no questions. Again, Vijayta, by the way, we can hear you clearly now. So feel free to put the WhatsApp chat link in the chat message so the people can get that, Vijayta, if you don't mind.
Sure, Chris. I'm trying to do that.
Thank you.
So hi everyone. See, I have put the WhatsApp link in the chat window. Please click on that link and join our WhatsApp group. And if you have any questions, you can put in all your questions there. The speaker is also there in the group and he can answer your questions at the earliest. Anything else, Chris?
No, that'll be it, Vijayta. You can end the call.
Okay. Thanks to everyone for being there. Thank you, Chris, for taking time out and explaining such a good features of Graphite. I wish you all a very good evening and very good day to you guys.
Thank you, guys.